The left is always inclined to look on the grim side of things. Always inclined to look on the grim side of things. The cup is always half empty. Until you point out, look, it's half full. It doesn't look so bad.
Welcome to Political Gingervitis, the crazy and zany podcast for progressives who need a laugh. I'm your hostess with the mostest, Andrew Stewart, and this week we're going to try to put a smile on your face and maybe a few thoughts in your head. Welcome again, folks, to another exciting episode of Political Gingervitis. I'm your host, Andrew Stewart, and today we are going to have a very interesting episode for you, focused around all things in the bedroom. Yes, we're going to do an episode about sex work. First, though, I wanted to do a brief side jaunt into the topic of sex at work. Now, most of you are probably aware and have seen coverage of this ongoing fiasco that is the revelations of the extremely despicable behavior of Harvey Weinstein, the Hollywood producer. Having a bit of understanding of how these things work, I figured I would just go into a little bit of this. So, I don't know what I find more disturbing. The fact that movie mogul Harvey Weinstein is yet another Hollywood pig producer who leveraged his power to coerce sexual favors from women, or the galling faux outrage exhibited in the New York Times with their coverage of this matter. So, in the Times' first big story about the case, it said that Weinstein's appalling behavior stretched back, quote, over nearly 3 decades, unquote. We read about him pressuring women to look at his naked, droopy, pink Play-Doh ass, give him massages, watch him bathe, and other creepy shit that no one should ever be subjected to. Of course, this sort of debauchery has been going on for literally ever in Hollywood. From the beginning, when the original California studios were constructed in an orange grove agricultural town, the modus operandi has been breaking the law and making it look cool on the left coast. So here's what happened. Thomas Edison, who was a prick, had a habit of hiring thugs to rough up people who broke his patents and then burned down the houses of said patent violators. And you can just ask a guy named Tesla about it. So when a bunch of bohemians, theater rejects, queers, and Jews figured out how to break his cinema camera and projection technology patents, they did the smartest thing possible. They put a whole continent between his New Jersey laboratories and their studios. In such circumstances, inappropriate sexual behavior is just not likely. It's the law of nature. Charlie Chaplin, for instance, was infamous for impregnating teenagers on a semi-regular basis, to the point that FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover had him exiled to Switzerland. Hoover said that it was for political reasons, but in hindsight, we all know his secret files were generally his own little erotic reading stash. Hollywood has been a neurotic sexual disaster ever since. And that, of course, has absolutely nothing to do at all with this, because the fact is, this all reaching back 3 decades is like the late 80s. Like, earliest possible date is 1987, right? Yeah. And the fact is, back in 1987, Weinstein was still at Miramax, which was making a killing as a New York-based independent film distributor. And his company was getting high praises on a regular basis from periodicals like the New York Times. So, in yonder days of ye old VCR, Bob and Harvey Weinstein were running Miramax and had a significant corner on the market for independent film talent. Back then, their hip and trendy appeal, which media outlets like the Times helped polish, was partly based on the fact they were the outsiders doing their thing in New York, not like those rich industrial sellouts in Hollywood. I mean, how 80s punk rock can you possibly get? So the routine was really straightforward. A filmmaker would put together a piece of garbage they said was the crown diadem of cinema history. They'd bring it someplace like the independent feature film market or another hip New York film festival. And then Miramax or a competitor like New Line or Troma would buy the film, slap together a promotional package on the front end, and they'd maybe even throw it into the rotation at Sundance or Cannes, along with some hyperbolic twaddle on the poster about why this film was so astoundingly different from the rest of the offerings, which, if you don't recall, were pretty much boring and all very typically American, which means kind of reactionary. All the while, in the front row for nearly 3 decades, there was always a seat reserved for a New York Times movie critic who could choose on any Friday they decided to go slumming and visit a Miramax hosted film junket. Personally, I've actually been to a New York press junket for a movie. It's a lot of gossip and posturing around overpriced food at some trendy New York restaurant, probably in like Soho. The idea that at least one cub reporter at the Times never knew that Harvey Weinstein was a pig is the most absurd thing you could possibly say to someone who has ever been in a New York film junket. Here's the 2 quotes from the story that explain everything. Dozens of Mr. Weinstein's former and current employees, from assistants to top executives, said they knew of inappropriate conduct while they worked for him. Only a handful said they ever confronted him. In speaking out about her hotel episode, Ashley Judd said in a recent interview, "Women have been talking about Harvey amongst themselves for a long time, and it is simply beyond time to have the conversation publicly." And then in another quote, it says, "In public, he presents himself as a liberal lion, a longtime Democratic donor. He hosted a fundraiser for Hillary Clinton at his Manhattan home last year. He employed Malia Obama, the oldest daughter of former President Barack Obama, as an intern this year, and recently helped endow a faculty chair at Rutgers University in Gloria Steinem's name." End quote. The number of women who continued to be subjected to Weinstein's pig shit can be laid partly at the feet of a gray lady that has been nothing more than a newsletter of Wall Street Democrats for decades. They could have written this story years ago and didn't, because it would have not gone down well with the reliable Hollywood donor class that funds the Democratic Party and is also a major segment of the newspaper's shrinking core demographic. In other words, folks, the scandal is not as much that Harvey Weinstein is a pig, because, that's fairly normal. The scandal is that the New York Times is pretending they only just found this stuff out. So that's sex at work that is totally inappropriate and uncalled for, and sexual harassment, which is a form of violence, and any sane person has to totally be opposed to that sort of thing. But now I wanted to go to the other end of the spectrum, and today I'm having you take in a lecture offered by my very dear friend and comrade Bella Robinson, who is a sex worker advocate and activist based out of Rhode Island, who has a fantastic set of insights to offer about the trade of being a sex worker and why they deserve to be given the same respect and solidarity that is expressed for any other type of working person in America. This is extracted from a lecture she did at Southern Connecticut State University several years ago, and which I recorded. Uh, I hope you guys will take this in with an amount of seriousness and consider the implications, because here's the deal: sex work is now being subjected to uh, the sort of policing that you previously have seen uh, put into the black market drug sales. What's happening is relatively simple. Over the past 50 years, we have seen this development of the war on drugs. The war on drugs has put black and brown men and women into jail, which provides a labor force and cheap uh, basis to do the production of all sorts of goods which are sold in America. As a result, you have seen this proliferation of the prison industrial complex. However, because of the developments in popular culture that did stem out of the 1960s and 70s, we are seeing in several states now the rolling back of the drug war, and it's very possible that within my lifetime I could see the end of the war on drugs. However, that does cut off the access to cheap labor that the prison industrial complex has. And so what they do is they substitute the drug offender with the sex offender. Yes, they're going after consenting adults engaging in consenting sexual activity and saying they are involved in non consensual sexual violence against individuals under the heading of human trafficking or sex trafficking. Now, let's be absolutely clear. When there is human trafficking and sexual violence, that is absolutely and always unacceptable, and it must be opposed in all ways. However, when an individual does decide fully and uh, without any coercion to engage in sex work, be it through uh, independent contracting using the internet or at a dancer's club or in media such as photography and video, that is their right as workers, and they need to be supported as workers. And the exploitation they should be prevented from experiencing is the exploitation that labor experiences from the boss, which is, of course, as old as capitalism is. And in this regard, I would encourage people to have an open mind and understand that the internet has substantially changed the playing field. We have seen the mafia and other dubious actors that previously have been elements of the sexual uh, workers' life cut out of the picture by the internet. Now, sex workers are able to do these things completely independently and in full control of both their agency and their wages. It's a living that some people say they prefer to other forms of work. And so I would uh, encourage people to avoid any sort of condescension or Victorian looking down your nose at sex workers because they choose to engage in this form of work, and instead acknowledge that they might in fact say that their job is better than your job will ever be. So with those things in mind, I'll turn it over to Bella Robinson.
Okay, I am Dr. Alan Brown. I'm a new faculty member in the Department of Sociology, and I have brought to you for Social Justice Week one of the first events that sociology is sponsoring. So we have a talk today by Ms. Bella Robinson, who is on the board director of Coyote. Yes. Coyote, she'll tell you all about Coyote, and is going to talk to you about sex work and social justice, and it's especially relevant given the changes that are happening both in the United States and worldwide in terms of sex workers' rights, and the whole conundrum around human trafficking, and so she's going to talk to us about some of that. So anyway, I will not take up any more of your time. Let's welcome Bella Robinson.
I'm clapping for myself.
That's okay.
Hi, everyone. I'm Bella Robinson, and I'm the executive director of the Rhode Island chapter of Coyote. I've been a sex worker for over 32 years, and I'm also a board member of the Erotic Service Provider Legal Education and Research Project, and I'm a union member with the Erotic Service Provider Union. So, basically, a lot of people will read things that Rhode Island decriminalized prostitution by accident. That's what you read in the media. But what really happened is in the 70s, all prostitution was a felony. Can you hear? Okay. Is that better? Okay. All prostitution was a felony in the state of Rhode Island. And the court system got bungled up because the women would sit in jail for about 6 months. So Margot St. James, who was the original founder of Coyote, she sued the Attorney General, and her complaint was, 1, what right does the state have to do in the sex lives of adults in private? And 2, you're only arresting the woman. So the legislatures got together, and I think they got really scared. They're like, what if we lose? What if they rule it unconstitutional? So they scrambled around, they came up with a compromise. We're going to make public prostitution a misdemeanor, and it kind of left a loophole for indoor prostitution, and no one really noticed. And for about 30 years, it was no problem. No one really understood. And I think around 2002, they raided a couple spas in Rhode Island, and they hired Michael Kaliska, who explained to the judge that this wasn't illegal. So they threw out the cases. And then we started picking up with the trafficking narrative. What the trafficking narrative is going to tell you is that there's 300,000 children being exploited and sex slaves all over America, and all prostitution's paid rape, and it's horrible, and it's a big war. And there's no better media campaign than Want to Save Kids. I mean, the only thing that really beats this is saving starving children from other countries, because I think we can all agree we don't want to see any harm come to teenagers. So another narrative that they're doing is they're making everyone in the sex trade is a pimp or a trafficker, and the sex trade is making $86 million a year, but the women aren't getting any. And they're basically saying, we need to save these white women. They don't care about the men or the colored women or anyone else. This is all directed. And if we look back in history, the Mann Act in 1904, they got reports that immigrants were being smuggled into the country to work at brothels, and they investigated these reports to confirm them within months and passed the Mann Act in 1904, which said if you crossed a state line for an immoral act, that it was a crime. And the law was basically made to stop white women from fraternizing with black men. There was African-American prizefighter Joe Jackson, who was dated and actually married a sex worker, a prostitute, and the prostitute's mother said she'd rather have her institutionalized forever than be with him. So the Mann Act came into place, and, you think, how could they even confirm this was going on in 1904? Didn't it take like 3 months to send a letter from California to New York back then? I mean, no, they had it all done. So the trafficking narrative now, when I started studying this back in 2009, I became an activist because of the Gilgo Beach murders up in Long Island. There was over a dozen women. One of them was Melissa Kane's sister from Connecticut. One of them was, these were all young women. And it was really horrific the way they were treated, and that the media didn't care, and the New York Police Department wouldn't even take a report for one of the families, and the FBI said, we can't intervene because we don't know if we have jurisdiction, but they charged the driver with the Mann Act. So we know they had jurisdiction, and no one cared, and something deep in me broke, and I said no more. Someone's going to stand up for these women, and this is not okay. And I also understand that the generation of sex workers is becoming younger and younger every day. So last year in New York, the Urban Justice Department did a youth study. They got a grant from DOJ, and they surveyed almost 300 youths who entered into what we call survival sex as teens. They said that they could not get the state of New York to provide them housing, any basic service they needed, and 96% said they didn't have pimps and didn't feel exploited. They taught each other how to place ads on Backpage and find clients and avoid the police and the social workers. So then I found out these trafficking NGOs are getting $686 million a year just to create awareness. They don't have to provide any service at all. So, and I don't know if you people know, but you can take human trafficking from home, because I did. And I took this online human trafficking class out of Ohio, and it was a really stigmatizing thing from the front. The professor that taught it, it was an online class. In her little video, she talks about the girl in Mexico that had to have sex with a donkey, or just some horrific thing, like this is what happens every day to us women, right? And then we're online, and they actually kicked out my professor friend down in Brazil, and then they let him back in, and he's actually on the Brazil trafficking board for the whole country, and they threw him out, and then when he complained, they let him back in. So as you see, they now say I'm an expert in human trafficking because I took this class, and we were very concerned that they were handing out these certificates. So we're online, and people are saying things like, they wanted to be first responders to go with the cops on raids to massage parlors, and I said, why? Respond with what? You don't even have bed to give a victim or a job or anything for these people. And then we started to realize that they purposely conflating consensual adult prostitution with human trafficking. And another really bad part of the problem is because this makes regular labor trafficking and real, I'm not saying sex trafficking doesn't happen, it's not real, but we know that's like this much of the problem, and 80% in the labor trafficking. All of that is totally ignored now. So in June, my professor, friend Alina Brown at Brown University had 13 college students, high school students, that parents were rich enough to send them to Brown for 2 weeks to take 2 weeks on trafficking because it's going to look good on your college resume. The trafficking NGO is the biggest growth industry since the recession, other than low-paying jobs. It's the biggest. Everyone. It's just like computers 30 years ago. Everyone's going to school. How many people are studying human trafficking? See, everyone's doing it. So I asked her student. Now, one of the girl students whispered in my ear that she was from LA, and they told her that she needed to form an NGO to create awareness. But whatever she does, not to be a hero and try to help any of them. So I sent them out, and I said, you can leave the campus. I want you to walk up to everyone you know, see, and just say, tell me everything you know about human trafficking, and come back and tell me what they say. We found out only one person did know about it. Almost everyone thought it only had to do with sex, and only one or two people had any clue about any other kind of labor abuse anywhere in the world. So when one morning I proved to these kids that even the Indians of the rainforest have heard about trafficking, now what are we going to do about it? Or if you're going to create awareness, let's create awareness about real slave-like conditions for, farmers and, the kids picking cocoa leaves and all this other horrendous stuff, but all of that's whitewashed. So now I started to see the money is going to the NGOs. The DOJ is in bed with the NGOs. There's one of the top really bad researchers, Melissa Farley. Melissa Farley gets a third of her annual budget from the Department of Justice, and she wrote a book, and she went out to the Nevada brothels a couple years ago, and she couldn't find anyone that says they were forced or they didn't like it, so she came up with the conclusion that we all have false consciousness, and that we don't understand we're being abused because we're dumb women. And, you'll hear stigmatizing things like, 98% of sex workers were sexually abused when they were children. Well, let me ask you, how many Walmart workers were sexually abused when they were children? And if I was sexually abused as a child, what does that have to do with trying to take away my right to agency as an adult, as a grown woman? It's really kind of And then when I wanted to look at the harms they're creating, because they claim they want to save the kids. We all want to save the kids. But what it really is doing, it's throwing the kids under the bus in their attempt to try to abolish all prostitution. And does anyone really think that we'll abolish prostitution completely anywhere on this planet, anytime? No. It's been around since the beginning of time. It'd be nice to abolish poverty. Now, if we could reduce prostitution by creating more resources, more opportunities, and reducing poverty, because not so many people will want to go into the industry. But it's going to be a voluntary thing. You can't hand someone a housing voucher and say, here's a housing voucher, but you got to promise not to be a hoe anymore. It just doesn't work. It really does. But if you had a housing voucher, maybe I wouldn't have to do as much sex work, or I could go to school, or I could help lift myself up. So we saw all this money going to these agencies, and none of them are doing anything about it. But another thing they do is they take things out of context. So I can go to a drug rehab and round up all the hookers and interview them, and I can go tell the public that 99% of the hookers were heroin addicts. But I don't bother to tell you all the facts that went along with that. And these are the kind of stigmatizing things that we hear in the media. Now, one of my good mentors is Norma Jean Almadava. She wrote the book Cop to Call Girl. She was an LAPD cop for 10 years, and she is our statistician. Norma runs a website called policeprostitutionandpolitics.com. Norma has gone and pulled all prostitution and disorderly conduct arrests in the United States for 30 years. And she's done it by state, by age, because she even explains how to go to the DOJ website and verify her numbers. And she's got a little calculator and everything. And we found out that only 1.8% of all of those arrests involved minors. We found out that in the 80s and 90s, they were arresting more teenage prostitutes than in 2010. So how can this be an ever big growing problem if the numbers are really going down? We found out the average age of arrest was 25 to 45. Now, I want to talk about domestic violence in a minute here. I want you to think about a scenario. We're going to make a fake scenario. Anne's a 25-year-old escort. She's been escorting for 2 or 3 years. She's a college student, and she meets a guy, and they move in together, and they think they're in love, and all is good for about 6 months. Now, whether he beats on her, talks down to her, whatever the problem is, she's decided she's done with him. She's over him. Well, she can't tell him to leave because what's going to happen? He's going to tell her and the cops and the landlord she's a hoe. They might even take her to jail and leave him in the house with her children. So we have kind of nailed the coffin shut for her. In New York, they've started trafficking court. I call it AKA whore court because they don't ask if you're a victim. They rounded up 8,500 women that had not been arrested the year previously. 89% of them were women of color from the streets. So basically, once you're labeled, you can never go out in the street again, or we're going to get you. And basically, they were sending women to yoga classes and some like cheesy shame-based counseling, and this was supposed to change their life. They didn't care if these women could pay their rent or find babysitters or get jobs or flee their abusers. And one woman had to take like 3 buses and leave her house at 5 a.m. And it's kind of set up like drug court. Like if I get, in trouble again, they'll extend it. And I have to go back to this court every week, and they said the only white people were the judges and the prosecutors. And while you're in there, guess who you wait with? I don't know if anyone's been to even traffic court where you wait 2, 3, 4 hours in the hallways. You get to sit there with the guys. They're in there for domestic violence. That's who you hang out with while you wait to see the court people. Wow. So maybe you can find a new pimp or a new abusive boyfriend while you're there. So all of that, and none of these people offered these women anything. This was just so then they came up with, we're going to expunge their records. Now, first of all, it's only a misdemeanor if it's not a trafficking case. And once your name and your name and address and photo has been all over the internet, even if you get adjudicated. Well, I'll give you an example. My first prostitution conviction was just weeks after my 18th birthday. I was told if I pled guilty and did 6 months probation, they would withhold the adjudication and I wouldn't have a record. Well, I did all that. And I can go and been verified today, and it says prostitution, adjudication withheld. What good does that do me? It's kind of really, really silly when you think about that. And then if you think about the stereotypes and how unfair, if you're Governor Spitzler and you get caught with a hooker, you don't get fired, you don't go to jail, and you get your own TV show. But if you're the girl that answered the phone for the escort service, you're going to go to jail and pay a big fine. When I lived in New Jersey in 2008, I actually got out of the sex business for years. I was raising my daughter, was an A&E, a PCS worker, did home health care work. And in like 2005, I got laid off and lost my house in foreclosure like half the country. And my daughter was in high school, and I thought, I cannot let my kid grow up and not be a self-sufficient adult, or I have failed her. I do not want her to be in the same situation I was in when I was 18. When I was 17, I married a 41-year-old man. The state of Florida had custody of me, and they allowed this. And this would be legally defined as child bride and sex trafficking under today's current laws. So I will claim that at one point I was a sex trafficking victim. That was before I ever did sex work. So I got back into it. I fled Florida, been to prison twice. I was a drug addict for years. Obviously not anymore. And so I moved to New Jersey, and I had a warrant in Florida. I still have a warrant. My warrant in Florida will never go away, no matter how much money I throw at it. And Florida will not come get me as long as I don't go to Florida. But anytime I get a speeding ticket, we all want to talk about my warrant search my car. And this was going to happen until I'm 90. It's just the way my life's going to be. So I was living in New Jersey. I rented a rental house, and I let another woman, she was in her 40s. We were both in our mid-40s at the time, and we had an ad on Craigslist, and we worked Monday through Friday from like 8 to 2 in the afternoon, like a couple hours a day from this house. And it was a Thursday afternoon at 2 o'clock in the morning, that a SWAT team, pouring rain slickers, they did that, and then they rammed the door with the big thing, okay? They didn't even have a warrant. Listen. My friend Kathy is like, oh my God, I think someone's trying to break in, call the cops. And it is the cops. And then they lie to the media. They tell the media that, we're a bunch of whores and how this was a cop they borrowed from. It was a CI that was a sex offender that they used as a CI. They had an absolute... I'm a dummy. I just plead guilty and let them take me to jail. Within 4 hours, I'm sentenced and booked into Morris County Jail. And the officer that booked me and looked at me and says, I've been doing this for 17 years. I've never seen anyone sentenced and booked into jail so quick. Because from the SWAT team to the court to the jail, 4 hours. But I was like, I've done this before. I was like, okay, let's go. And I also knew no one else was going to get in trouble. They weren't going to take my computer, my black book. My clients were going to be safe. And I really figured if I pled guilty, maybe Florida would leave me alone. So then we found out Florida was going to leave me alone. And then they come in and they tell me, so I could become like a celebrity in this jail. All the stuff I did in Florida with drugs, I was never in the newspaper. And all of a sudden, over this misdemeanor, I'm in the newspaper. And the girls in jail are like, oh my God, you're in the newspaper. And of course, my name and my address and everything's in the newspaper. I was really lucky. My landlord didn't throw me out. They broke his door. I mean, he lowered my rent for 3 months while I sat in jail and didn't throw me out. He was really cool. And, I was like, here's $500 for your door. I'm so sorry. And so they come after a couple days and they tell me they're going to release me on parole. And I said, I have a Florida warrant. What do you mean you're going to release me on parole? I'm supposed to do 6 months. So they release me in 90 days, and I get a letter in the mail that says if I don't pay a $3,720 fine by Friday, I got to go to court. So I go to court and I stand up in front of this judge and I go, listen, I can pay you $25 today. I'm a single mom. I got a 17-year-old daughter. I've lost my house. I don't have a job. I have no income. There's no way I can pay this. And he looks at me and he does the math. He says, you're going to pay $310 a month for 12 months, or I'm going to issue you a warrant for your arrest. Now, I don't know. Is anyone here can afford to pay $310 a month over their bills for the next 12 months? So look, even the academics can't. Okay? See, once you get the degree, you still can't afford anything. So, and I'm like, okay, so basically what he's telling me is to go turn some tricks and pay this, and that's exactly what I did. So, I've been pimped out by the state. They pimped me out as a minor. They pimped me out as an adult. They provided me no resources, but they lie to the media and say, we rescued these women. No, they arrested them. They didn't offer them. You always hear about services. Has anyone ever called 211 and tried to find a service for like a homeless person or a friend or domestic violence? And you find out they ain't got nothing, right? You're lucky if you can find a bed in a public shelter. Ain't no one got nothing. No one's going to pay your rent, pay your electric, babysit your kids, nothing. Well, with the trafficking hysteria, the State Department got up and said, we hired 250 more caseworkers. What good is caseworkers when there's no services? Don't caseworkers make $50,000 a year and have offices? That seems like to be a lot of wasted money. So, needless to say, I was pretty traumatized by that because, Melissa Farley will also tell you we all have post-traumatic stress disorder, and I do, but I don't have it from sex work. I have it from prison and from the police knocking in my door and scaring the shit out of me, waving around guns, screaming, we know what's going on. Me and my girlfriend are lingerie, and they've got guns. We know what's going on. Okay, so bad day in Jersey, and I moved to Rhode Island because I get out of jail, and my client says it's decrimed in Rhode Island, and I felt like the stupidest whore in the world. I was like, how did I not know this? So I pack up my house, and I moved to Rhode Island. And 6 months later, they took it all away. And I was watching it in the media. I didn't know anything about activism, or it just happened too quick before I could stop it. But now I'm pissed off. Because I tell you why. I felt free for the first time in my life when I got to Rhode Island. If you threatened me, I was calling the cops, and you were going to jail. And it was just this sense of freedom, and you didn't have to worry about your landlord or the PTA or people discriminating. Because you know what? And I've learned to blend in because it makes my life easier. Now, I want to talk about privilege for a minute. It was a few years ago I really didn't understand that I had privilege because I had white skin, because we weren't taught that as kids. And I remember being in middle school and going, why are these people still complaining about what happened 300 years? I was really that stupid. I really didn't get it, because our system does not teach us this in school. And then I got it. And I understand when I'm pulled over by a police officer, I'm treated a different way until he runs my name. Oh, I'm a white lady in middle age too. That's even a better one. And I started to get it. I'm treated differently when I'm in a store. No one's looking at me like I'm going to steal. And, when I rent an apartment, all these things. So if I can hide who I am and not let people know, I'm treated decently. Unfortunately, it kind of sucks for real relationships, because how would you feel if any time you met someone or started a friendship, you had to lie to them right off the bat? Do you think I can tell my neighbors and people around my house, oh, by the way, I'm a hoe and I live in an apartment such and such? No, so I just act like the stuck-up bitch that doesn't talk to anybody, because, I just can't put myself out there, so I've had to learn to hide who I am. So I have a girlfriend of mine that's kind of edgy, and she's a dom, and, she's got the punk hair. She does the big balloons where she puts the people in the balloons for fetish. And she talks a lot about being stigmatized when she was young, because the police used to hassle her because they looked different, and, they were gothic, and da-da-da. And part of me wanted to scream, well, you could change the way you looked in public to minimize, not saying that it's okay that you're harassed, but you could minimize that. People can't change their skin kind to minimize the abuse when they walk around. So I've learned to adapt tools to keep me safer. So I did want to say that about privilege, because I really didn't get it. Now, at the time, I also wasn't getting it because I wasn't feeling really privileged other than my skin. I'd been to prison. I was a hoe. I'm not feeling the privilege, but I realize now that there's a lot of people that have more privilege than me, and there's a lot of people that have a lot less privilege than me. And I need to use my voice to stand up for everyone. So sex worker rights is a civil rights movement. And it's going to be different than any other movement, because I want it to include everyone. I don't want to leave anyone behind. And if we're going to look at these things, I want to talk about gay rights for a moment. When I have a daughter that's getting ready to turn 25, and when I tell her that 30 years ago people publicly hated on gay people, she can't wrap her head around it. I said, no, you could stand in the street and beat up a gay person, and the neighborhood cheered you on. It was okay. And now if you even make a gay slur in public, you're publicly called out for it. So if you're going to be a gay hater, you better do it in the closet, because you can't do it in public anymore, right? Well, let's look at what they had to do. Being gay used to be illegal. And what do you know? The Supreme Court said, oh, that shit's unconstitutional. And then they said, well, you know what? We need discrimination laws. And we need hate crime legislation. And even then, it took another couple decades for social perception to change. And then it became all about the right to marry, and somewhere went sideways. But I had this part of this resentment, too, that I don't know if people heard, but about a month or two ago, the Amnesty International came out with a proposal to suggest that we decriminalize adult prostitution, clients, and third parties worldwide to reduce violence. And 5 minutes later, LGBTQ comes out and says, oh, yeah, we agree. There's a lot of our members that are sex workers. And we're like, where have you been for 20 years? So did everyone see that they were pissed off that they were going to take the trans women out of the Stonewall movie? But no one cared that they were going to take the whores out of the movie. No. The transgender women, there were no other jobs. No one else would hire you. Almost all of them did sex work, but everyone wants to take that out of the narrative. Because, you've been taught, think about for a minute, when's the first time you knew what a prostitute, hooker, or an escort was? Where did you learn this? Did you learn it from cop shows? You didn't learn it in school. Most likely, your parents didn't tell you unless you heard conversations about their prostitution problems in your neighborhood. So basically, you heard this from TV, or if you're a boy, you might have been talking about porn as you're hitting puberty, and you're not going to talk about porn without prostitution coming up with other boys and men. Because I really started to think about, where do people get their information about, we know whores are bad, stay in school, but where does this come from? So we learned the trafficking NGOs are stealing all the money. I believe you think about it, if I raised money for starving kids and didn't send food, I'd be in jail. But there's this legal loophole under the creating awareness, guys. And does creating awareness really help anyone? Probably not. So in Rhode Island, in 2009, they criminalized prostitution, and they said there's no way we can investigate human trafficking without criminalizing everyone. And I was like, really? It's kind of like domestic violence. You knock on a door, you ask for an ID, you say, are you okay, right? No, but they insisted not. Since then, they've only found 6 or 7 trafficking victims. They were all minors. Federal law says if you're under 18 or you're an immigrant, illegal immigrant, you're classified as a trafficking victim, and because you can't consent. If you're an adult, forced coercion or fraud needs to be present. Alaska's state law says all commercial sex is prostitution, and Alaska is charging the women with trafficking themselves and sending them to prison for it. So I went to a trafficking task force in Rhode Island, and there was a NGO called Day One. They deal with child sexual trauma. Now they're getting on the trafficking bandwagon, and they had the Attorney General, and they had Detective of Providence Police, and they had someone from Homeland Security. The woman, she didn't look like she was 15 years old, and she was from Homeland Security. And this organization's up there saying, you know, we want to train postal workers to identify residential brothels. And I got up and flipped, and I was like, you're going to get these women charged with trafficking. And you've just admitted you don't even have a bed to put a victim in. Okay, you got no jobs, no education, nothing. But you want to round them up and create all, and I was just like, what are you going to look for, Asian women moving mattresses? We're going to stereotype them too next, right? And you've seen all the posters, the white girl with the black hand against her mouth, and she's in the cage, and, you know, and I'm not saying that doesn't ever happen, but usually there's no money involved in real sex slavery, okay? And most labor abuses, there's no money taking place. So, then the one woman says, she was talking about the teens, because they had rescued a 14 and a 17-year-old just over the state line in Massachusetts in a hotel. And they were talking about they take him down to Hillsborough Hospital. If they think the teen is like incorrigible and going to run away, they lock him down on suicide watch. Can you imagine what that cost us as taxpayers to have a kid in a hospital on suicide watch? I would imagine it's $3,000 to $5,000 a day. And then they interrogate the kid. Now, they got a grant for a $50,000 one-way police mirror. $50,000 for a mirror. And one person asked the teen questions, and everyone else can send questions, but only one person has to talk to the child. And they do this all without an attorney, without the kid having any representation, and they make a list of everyone this kid knows. And this is to make sure this child is never placed in a foster home or facility with anyone they know again, so they can't lure someone back in or be lured back in. And I'm like, okay. We don't separate shoplifters from murderers in prison. We don't separate people in drug rehab by class or money. That's matter of fact, drug rehab's the one place you don't get classified. Everyone's in one group. And I'm like, but what's this need with the good girls from the bad girls thing? I mean, do we really believe someone's virtue is worthy, and without it you're worth nothing? And what are these messages we're sending? So I thought that was really horrific. Another thing I wanted to talk to you about is victims' compensation. So the Erotic Service Provider Union last 2013 got California to change their regulations. The regulation said that criminals or sex workers were excluded from victims' compensation because they're criminals. Well, there's a woman named Miss R that was raped in her apartment, no criminal record, never been in trouble. It was such a violent rape, the neighbors called the cops. There was blood everywhere. The guy broke her eardrum. The cops get there, and she admits, I'm an escort and I have a back page ad. Like I said, she's got no criminal record. I think she's like 32 years old. And they denied her victim's compensation because she was a hoe. And then she went to the Rape Crisis Center, and the person that you only take 8 hours of training. The guy was on parole for a violent crime towards a woman, and he's counseling her, and all he wants to know is what kind of sex she was having. So a violent man is the person in charge. Yeah. Then we did a little bit more investigating, and we found out some of the rape crisis centers will not take minors for counseling and services, and others will. And I thought, okay, so I can get birth control when I'm 17. I can get an abortion when I'm 17, but if I'm raped, I can't talk to someone when I'm 17. Fuck. So anyway, we rallied around and we embarrassed these politicians, and we had some public assembly meetings. I called in and did a phone conference to testify, and we said, what message are we sending to society that it's okay to abuse some women? Some women are unworthy, and this is okay. Well, I think we can all kind of agree we've got it's just a little problem with the police nowadays, right? Just a little bit. Okay. We see the excessive violence. We see the policing of poor communities. We see the state attorneys lying and faking evidence and sending men of color to prison for decades, and then when they find out they lied and they cheated to get the conviction, nothing happens to these people. They don't even do this to them. So we see all of this happening. And another analogy that's being missing from the conversation is if people are really interested in teens and children being sexually abused, why is there no news about the churches and the football coaches and that website, Police, Prostitution, and Politics? We got some great posters. Everything on the site's printable. We have a database of over 700 U.S. cops, not accused, convicted of sexually assaulting children. Many of them only get probation. They're not made to register as sex offenders. They can move to another city and be a cop all over again. Well, I knew what happened, because you know what happens when you say it's okay to promote violence against whores? It happens to start to spill over to ordinary women. Oh, I think you're a hoe. You look like a slut. I can do it to you, too. And now everyone's being raped. Okay. We have 500,000 untested rape kits in evidence lockers. And in Detroit a couple years ago, they tested, I think, 10,000 of them. They found 100 serial rapists. One guy had raped women in 21 states. Our conviction rate for rape is less than 5% in this country. But we're stalking hookers because all sex work is rape. Okay. So you start to see that none of these arguments are really making sense, let alone coming up with a solution. It's like leaving a kid with a bunch of candy and telling him don't eat sweets. Whatever you do, don't eat the sweets and everything will be okay. It's not going to change anything. So we did that. And another thing I want to talk about Alaska when I was talking about the women being trafficking themselves. There was a woman, Amber Bates. She was recently sentenced to 5 years in prison. Amber has a 14-year-old daughter, a 23-year-old schizophrenic son that she cares for. All the women involved, the youngest one was 19. Most of the women were like in their 30s. And they all agreed that Amber treated them well. She never yelled at them. They could decline clients. They worked when they wanted to. It was a fair deal, and they'd love to work for her again because she kept them safe and she screened calls. Well, the prosecutor, even though there was no victim, Alaska law says all commercial sex is trafficking. And they were trying to get up there saying, oh, she only screened because she was looking for the guys that wouldn't pay. She didn't care about their safety. And I think then they went on about all these injuries or how she disregarded their safety. And I think the only injury they came up was literally a paper cut from digital penetration on someone. That was all the women had told the court, this woman did not harm us. And they still sentenced Amber to 5 years. So we've got 37,000 signatures demanding Alaska repeal their anti-prostitution laws. Now, meanwhile, this was going on. My friend Tara Burns in Alaska got her degree in social justice, and for her thesis, she interviewed the Alaskan sex workers. She found out 10% of the women that reported violence were arrested, 30% that tried to report violence were threatened with the arrest, and 75% of the women had been abused from the police before they entered the sex trade. So they call themselves CUSP, it's Community Something Safety up in Alaska. So anyway, there was a situation where there was a man emailing all the Anchorage escorts saying, if you don't pay me $1,000 the next time you come back to town, you're going to jail, I get a badge, and $1,000 will cover you and a friend. So this organization contacted the state police, and they said, well, we have this going on. Our witness would like to come forth, but we need immunity because it's a felony, Oh, no, we can't give you immunity. Oh, we can't do that. So meanwhile, Tara went up to Alaska, and she was lobbying the politicians sleeping in her van, and she got the governor's there, and she told the governor, and the governor made the state police investigate. So the first thing they did is they showed up. They found out who the guy was through his IP address, and they show up at his house. He was a firefighter with a little badge, and he was like, yeah, fuck the hose, yeah, I did it, yeah, and he just admitted it, and they indicted him and took him to jail. Now, rather than call back the community people and say, yeah, we're going to give her immunity, we'd like to talk to your victim now, they show up at her house, they figure out who she is by her IP address, and they show up, and they're not going to, don't worry, you're not in trouble, we just want to talk. Now, I don't know about you, but if the cops show up and tell you, don't worry, you're not in trouble, be scared, okay? The government is not there to help you. And then it gets more irate how they go after getting Amber. How Amber got arrested was there was a woman that had come from another town working with her. All the girls had went to the store. The girl was drunk. She couldn't find her wallet. She thought someone stole it. She called 911 and said she was a trafficking victim. And the next day when the police were calling her back, she sobered up, found her wallet, and didn't want nothing to do with it because she wasn't a victim. Well, what they did is they found her Backpage ad, and they set her up to have a sex act with her and then arrest her. Yes. And now they want to know all about Amber. And they did this to all the people that worked for Amber, and they said, oh, Amber could do a lot of good work. She kept immaculate records. She treated these women good. She was like a real good business person. but now we're putting her in prison for 5 years, and now her kids don't have anyone. So things are going to be changing fast in Alaska. So actually, I'm mimicking Tara's research in Rhode Island. Actually, I'm using Connecticut, Massachusetts, and New England. So far, I've interviewed 42 women. So I want to talk a minute about end the demand. It's called the Nordic model. So over in Sweden, buying and selling sex was like Canada. It wasn't a crime. And someone came along and said, oh, the women, it's not their fault, they're poor, they're this, they're that, they're victims. So now we're going to classify all men that buy sex as predators, and the war is on with them. And I want to tell you about Jasmine for a minute. Jasmine was a woman in Sweden who had been a sex worker. She quit sex work. She was in grad school. She had 2 small children, was going through a custody thing. The social workers were concerned that Jasmine wasn't ashamed that she used to be a sex worker, that they gave the kids to a guy with domestic violence and drug charges. She fought for 4 years for visitation right. When she finally got the supervised visit, he stabbed her to death in front of the children and the social worker. This is what stigma does. Her job wasn't illegal. This happens to strippers all the time and people with legal jobs because, you're a stripper, you deserve it, you're this. So the Nordic model came, and now they're trying to claim, and it was in the, we know when we went online that street prostitution went down. We believe, like in the United States, only about 15% of sex workers work on the streets. 85% of people work indoors nowadays. So they used it as an excuse, well, prostitution went down. No, it didn't. They went inside. And then it even showed, I watched the one video where the cop stalked this escort's apartment. She doesn't even know. And they're shaking the guys when they come out. And what they do is we know what's going on. Just tell us. If you tell us the truth, you'll only get a summons. But if you don't tell us, you're going to jail. And actually, they just came out about that, admitting it with minimum mandatory sentences. Well, if we can't threaten to give someone 100 years, how are we going to get them to snitch? So it's okay if the government uses forced coercion and fraud. And if you don't have anything to trade because you were you really weren't nobody in the organization, you're going away because you don't have anything to trade. Prison's not a nice place. The prison I was in, and I did 5 years in Lowell, a lot of women were dying, a lot of women were being raped. And has anyone watched Orange is the New Black? Any fans? Well, you know what the shoe was. The shoe is the same cell they put you in if I get in trouble, and it's the same cell I get if I'm in protective custody or if I'm on suicide watch. It's all the same cell. They just call it something different on different dates. So if you say, I've been raped or I've been attacked or I've been abused, you got a lock. So why would you tell on yourself? Basically, if you shut your mouth, you might survive and get out of there alive. Just this week, Professor Brown had pointed out on Facebook that the prison I was in, it's all over that there's all these women dying and 4-inch tumors and no one can even get an MRI. And I had hepatitis C when I was in prison. They knew it for 2 years before. Then when my liver started to fail, they didn't want to give me interferon. They tried to lie to me and tell me, oh, you only have that antivirus, you can't give it to anyone. And I fought and I filed grievances and I made them give me interferon. The nurse admitted to me, she goes, you came in March 97. She goes, by December, we quit testing anyone because we don't want to know. She goes, 80% of the population in prison has HIV, Hep C, Hep B, or a combination. And I only had Hep C. I was like, well. And interferon's so bad, your hair falls out. So when I get out, I apply for Social Security. You actually get flu-like symptoms. It's one of the drugs they put in chemo. It's a really strong drug. The Social Security Administration was never able to get my records out of the prison. You and your medical records and you as a person are property of DOC. The state owns you. It's almost like being a child of ward of the state when you're 8-year-old and you're in a foster care. You're ward of the state. So yeah, it was really, really bad stuff that happened there. And so they're saying, they're going to renew this contract in January, and their response was, we need to put out an alert. So it's almost like, we found out there's some horrific stuff's going on, so let me push the button and tell medical, get on the job. That's all they're doing, is pushing the button and making them aware. So nothing's going to happen, and those women are, and I'm sure this is happening in prisons all over the country, and I have no doubt men's prison's a lot worse than women's prison, a lot more violent. So I want to talk about for a few minutes about some of the things, because we could stay in the prompt forever. We can sit here and all the anti-trafficking people and women are being taken, and think about this, no one cares about women that are taken advantage of for free, right? We know that happens all the time, but no one cares about that. So I want to move towards the solution and some of the things that we've done. So like I said, we got the rape compensation laws changed. Now I'm going to go after Rhode Island's law. Rhode Island's law says if you did something that contributed to the violence, you're not eligible. What does that mean? Did I contribute because I didn't leave you the first time you hit me? Did I contribute because I'm in a dark alley? I'm on Backpage? I mean, what does that even really mean? It's just like, I see America as the country that looks for ways to exclude everyone, because if we exclude everyone, there's no one left that we have to do anything for or care about. So it's land of exclusion. So we did that, and I'm on the board of the Erotic Service Provider Legal Education and Research Project. We crowdfunded. We raised $30,000. It took us over a year last year, and we have Louis Skirvin, who's one of the best privacy attorneys in the country, and we have filed a constitutional challenge to California's prostitution laws, and we're suing like 3 or 4 attorney generals in a couple different counties there. And as soon as we announced this on the court steps, GoFundMe changed their terms and conditions and threw us off. Now, they had already gave us the $30,000. But we're in the media with our GoFundMe links, and you go to the campaign page, it says campaign closed. So they just blew our moment of media for us. So we're used to it. We're up on tilt. We're still doing it. Now the case, the state was trying to get it dismissed, and the judge hasn't ruled whether he's going to dismiss, because if it gets dismissed, we're going to the appeals court. But there's no time limit on when he has to say whether he's going to dismiss it or not. And this was I think we filed in March and August, and it was just weeks before the amnesty decision, so we were thinking maybe they want to do their homework. But my mentor, Maxine, California Assembly had a meeting for the trafficking people to find new solutions, and Maxine got on that board. And one of the people that are standing up for our case is the ex-deputy director of the people we're suing. He used to have that job and be in that office. And we did get them to understand that sex work is different than trafficking. And they're all concerned that none of the numbers make mistakes. And they're up there telling this guy where they've had 300 trafficking cases in just this county. He looks at me and goes, then why are there only 90 people in jail in the whole state of California for trafficking? He's like, please explain this. It doesn't make sense. So one of the things I was able to do with Norma's data, Palalis Project is the biggest trafficking place. They get $3 to $7 million in federal funds, and unfortunately, they were sponsored out of Brown University because Brown wanted to make up for their slave trade days, and they did this. So she's an alumni, and she came for an alumni dinner, and my professor friend invited me, and she stood up there and she says, before I came along, there was no trafficking laws in any state. And I thought, well, it was always illegal to kidnap people, force them into prostitution, rape people, and have sex with children. So what? And then she's like, women are calling now. They're calling in. They're self-identifying. They're not self-identifying as trafficking victims. They're saying, we're tired of this shit. We want something different in our life. But they got no options. And these people are like, we have no services. This needs to be a community effort. And la, 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 la. And she's like, I'm not here. And she's also on the government trafficking board for the whole country now. Okay. And I'm not here in my government capacity. I'm here as an alumni. And I get up there, and I'm probably a dumb whore because I look at her and I go, well, being that you're from the government, it might not be real smart for me to get up here and say, I'm a prostitute and I'm a sex worker, and I'm here. And I call her out on the numbers. Why are you lying to people telling them the average age of entry is 13 and 14? We know the average age of entry is 17 to 25. We know there are no services. We know that. And she started backpedaling. That's right. There was no services. We want to help. It needs to be a community. And she didn't deny anything I was saying. And a lot of people in the audience came up to me and thanked me. They were NGOs working with people getting out of prison, shelters. And none of these people could find resources from anybody, And then she gets up and tells the big lie. Well, I found a trafficking victim. It was a Chinese woman in one of the spas back in 2002. Now, first of all, there was never any trafficking victim. And second of all, the police will tell you in Donna Hughes' research, Donna Hughes kept quoting, the police said the women were in slave-like conditions, but there was nothing they could do and I was like, there's labor laws. If people were in slave-like conditions, why didn't they, check their IDs, check their immigration status? But what they were doing is they were trying to get the fire department to find out coding violations to close them down. But they couldn't. So they were abusing their authority to try to shut down legal businesses. And when you read Donna Hughes' research, it even gets really crazy. She talks about, I know how the Rhode Island spas were set up. You basically walked in and paid a $50, $60 fee. You went in the back and you made a deal with the girl, and she'd want another $100, $150. She kept all her money. She got to pick her shifts. She didn't have to live there. And the person at front took the $50 for each person that walked in. So it was a fair situation. But in it, she talked about how the women only left the brothel to go to the store in pairs and only took small amounts of money. Well, if I have $1,000 in my apartment, I don't take it with me when I go to 7-Eleven. I take $20 or $50 and I'm out. Right. So none of it made sense. And then at one point it was like everyone in Rhode Island was a mobster, and the pimps wore guns in plain sight. And they were sending busloads of men into the spas. And I thought, we send busloads of men to sporting events and casinos. That's a good thing. And then she talked about, the girls have to give up some of their earnings to the towel boy. I go, we're creating new jobs. We need people to clean and change the bads and maids. We're creating jobs. That's usually a good thing in business, but no, now it's a bad thing. So she talked about this woman who, I guess there was a business next to a spa. I'm assuming it's a store. And they said she could only speak a few words of English, but with her body gesture, she was able to gesture to the store owner that she was a trafficking victim and he was in danger because he had a small daughter and lived near a brothel. The man goes in the back of the store to call the police, and when he comes back, she's gone. And I said, well, maybe she asked for a pack of Newports and was tired of waiting on him. Body jet, and I'm like, this is like a bad romance trash novel, and this is supposed to be research. So then I found out just recently that she didn't have an IRB, and she talked to men in prison that claimed they were pimps. Now I'm sure there's a lot of guys in prison that have been charged with pimping or pandering, but I'm sure there's a lot of people that just want to brag about shit that never even happened, right? Because they do it on the review board. So back to the planning and action. So we filed our constitutional challenge. And I want to talk a little bit about the difference between decrim and legalization, because everyone thinks legalization sounds like it's good, right? Legalization sucks. I'm going to tell you why. So my friend works at as a UNLV, and she's got an IRB, and she's out at the brothels in Nevada working as a prostitute and doing her research. And what you have to do out there is you have to get a sheriff's card. It's the same kind of sheriff's card you get when you're a dancer in some cities. And then you have to get a work permit, and then you have to get tested at their facility, and then you have to pay $20 a day in rent, and then you have to give the brothel half of your money, and then you have to pay taxes, and you have to live out in the middle of the desert at this brothel. Now, how the brothels are set up, you tell them I want to work for 7 days, 2 weeks, 10 days, whatever. Now, you can leave at any time you want. But if you break your if you tell them you're going to be there in 2 weeks and mama dies on day 10 and you tell them you're leaving, if you leave, you're never welcome back at any of the Nevada brothels. You've ruined your... Okay. Now, I used to think when Rhode Island was decrimmed, the workers in Nevada had a choice. There was somewhere else they could go and still work legally, because a lot of these women fly there, too. So... Their situation is not a fair one. They have no labor rights. They're not employees. They have to pay these taxes. They have to ring a bell and line up like cattle. They're not allowed to do things their own way. They're not allowed to be independent. So I've looked at the New Zealand model. The New Zealand model, they formed a Prostitution Reform Act in 2002, and they brought social workers, law enforcement, the prostitutes, all these people on board, and they said the only thing we care about is the health and safety of the sex workers. We don't care about anything else. That's all that matters. And they decriminalized sex work for adults. I believe you have to be 16. I think they even let 16 and up. I tend to think it should be 18, but they've just about rid themselves of exploitation in the sex industry. There was a woman that sued a brothel for sexual harassment, a brothel manager, and she was awarded $25,000. There was another case where a client didn't want to pay a street worker $100. The cop said, you're going to go to an ATM and take out $100 and pay her, or you're going to jail for theft. But my favorite one was a lot of the escorts, we have white envelopes. The guy just lays an envelope up there. So this is supposed to be an $850 envelope. And he's being all smug because he thinks all the judge is going to do is tell him to pay her back. Because he didn't think she was going to call the cops to begin with. Because, most people can do anything they want to us because we can't call the cops. And he gets up there and the judge says, well, you got sex through fraud, and that's rape, so you're paying her back and you're going to jail for 8 months. So it shows when we start to have these cases. Another example, the Merseyside model in the UK. Buying and selling sex is still illegal, but they decided any crime towards a prostitute is a hate crime. They have, I think, 50 or 60% rape convictions on prostitutes being raped and there's only like 20% for the general population. They've taken it seriously rather than harass the street girls and the hookers. You think about this. How many people, when a violent guy gets away with doing something to me, how many more victims does he do it to? So I want to tell you about Heather. Oh, by the way, well, we kind of call ourselves Whore Nation because there's a lot of, there's SWAP, there's SBORP, there's KIDA, there's a lot of organizations, so we've kind of branded ourselves as Whore Nations, and we think it's important to people are like, why do you use that word? Actually, if you look at the Bible, whores were glorified. Jesus said, don't throw stones at us. I lost my train of thought, I'm sorry. So where was I? Someone give me a... Heather, thank you. Okay, Heather. Heather's in West Virginia, and she's an escort, and she's on Backpage, and she booked an appointment with this white guy in his 30s, clean-cut guy. Now, the funny part was he was 7 hours late for the appointment. Okay, but anyway, as soon as he walked into Heather's house, he grabbed her by the throat, started choking her against the wall, and said, live or die, bitch, I'm going to jail for a long time anyway. So Heather's against the wall, and she's going like this, trying to reach this rake to fight him off. And he puts the gun down to grab the rake out of her hand. She picks the gun up, she shoots him dead in the head. Dead. She runs out her back door, freaking out, screaming. The cops come. They take her down. We saw the video of her being interrogated by the police for a little bit until they realized. Has anyone seen Dexter? Okay. I like Dexter because he kills bad people, even though he's a serial killer. He's better than the other serial killers. So anyway, they go out to the guy's car, and he's got a kill kit. He's got the machetes, the garbage bag, the cleaning supplies, the tish twat. He's got the names of 10 escorts in his pocket. So they say, the police say, we don't know much about this Neil so-and-so guy. All we know is he's from Oregon, and he used to be a security guard. Now, you figure with the NSI, they should know when I fart, right? Well, the Associated Press finds out like this, that they find 6 members of the guy's immediate family and find out his mom died in January. No one's heard from him since. Now, the media can find this out, but, if she was a senator's daughter, they would have known all that, too. But again, she was just a whore, so no one really cared. And even though they said it was justified homicide, and then there was a group that tried to rally around and start a fundraiser because they had bought a blue dress and wanted to pimp her out to the media, and we shut them down. We raised her, I think, $12,000 or $14,000 in like 2 days for her to recover. She did have a substance abuse problem, and we had conversations. We said, what if we raise a bunch of money and she goes in ODs? And I said, you know what? It's not okay to take away an adult's choice, because that's what the trafficking people are trying to do to us. We have to hope she makes good decisions. We need to support her without enabling her. But if she does that, she does that. So we helped her raise the money. Someone actually had to fly out there because the police took her phone for evidence, so she was left in a bloody apartment with no phone, no resources, no money. Her electric was going to be shut off. So we flew someone out. They brought her a phone. They paid her light bill. They made sure her immediate needs were met. They spent months forming a relationship with Heather. And when Heather was ready, she went into rehab. And the woman flew back out there and flew Heather somewhere to rehab again. But it was on her terms when she was ready. And I can tell you, as a recovering addict, when you're not ready, it doesn't make much sense to force someone into it. It's different when you're court-ordered or you're in a lockdown, but when you can walk in the front door and walk out the back, you just wasted whatever money, and you wasted everyone's time and that spot for someone who needed it. So Heather is our hero. We have no doubt she saved many sex workers and even ordinary women from being raped or murdered, because I don't even think the guy was going to rape her. He was going to murder her. So while I was in Rhode Island at this task force with End the Demand, so End the Demand comes to Rhode Island, and they do 2 stings. They do one in April and then a couple months later. Within 2 stings, they arrest 42 guys. Well, the first time they arrested 22, and I'm looking at because now we're going to embarrass them. We're going to put their names in the paper, and I'm looking at the picture, and there's like one shady-looking white guy and a bunch of young Latino guys. I'm looking at the picture. So they're policing young, poor Latino guys because, see, if they, and I can tell you here, white men are our best customers because they get the most money, okay? But no, if we police them, the people running the hospitals and the schools and the government will all be in the newspaper. We can't have that, but we need to make an example out of someone. So it's kind of like the drug thing. We can find drugs in the nice neighborhoods too, but it's easier to, used to really get me mad at that car bait one. I can put a car bait on the school campus in a nice school, and someone will steal it here too. Or just go for a ride or open the door, and now, yeah. So all of that. So Okay, I lost my train of thought again, sorry.
End the demand.
End the demand, thank you. So end the demand is arresting these people. The next thing you know, we had the first death in Rhode Island. A 24-year-old girl, Ashley Macy, was murdered in her apartment. And I had started interviewing the sex workers, and the second sex worker I interviewed, I actually have her on audio, says, "Oh my God, I was choked out by a client a year ago. I didn't report it. I think he might be the same guy that killed Ashley." And she had survivor's guilt. Now, it turned out Ashley's killer was someone different, but still, we didn't know this at the time. So I'm at the trafficking task force, and I tell this police officer, "I have a witness that might know who killed Ashley, but she can't come forward because you ain't going to give her immunity." And he stands out in front of everyone and says, "We will give her witness protection." A cop does not have the authority to make that decision. It's going to come from the DA or the state attorney. So, and I'm thinking, you mean protective custody, like you're going to put her in the shoe? You know what I mean? But no, he's like, "Oh, no, we're good." Well, I don't believe him. So after the conference, he comes over, and we have little pads of paper on our tables, and he comes over and he puts a pad of paper and a pen down. Like he just thinks I'm going to write this girl's information down. And I looked at him and said, "Well, I'll check with her, and if she wants to come forward and you're willing to give her immunity, we're going to need an agreement." And I said, "We have to be sure that she's not going to be arrested for prostitution. She's not going to be investigated for prostitution." And I said, "No one's going to come looking for a freebie in 6 months. You got me?" He didn't like it. Another point that I pointed out during it, and I had this cop foaming at the mouth. It was kind of funny. I said, "Oh, let's talk about how cops are allowed to have sex with women and then arrest them for prostitution." "No, they don't." I said, "Well, sure, they do it in Hawaii. We just made them change the law. They do it in New York. They do it in Pennsylvania. And how do they know it's not a 16-year-old? How do we know it's really not a victim?" And so when we're pulling the public records, when Tara's teaching us to pull all these public records and the charging documents, a lot of times we're finding out cops are in a massage parlor getting a hand job for a solid 15 minutes while asking the girl, "What else can I get and how much?" As soon as you touch a cop's groin, that's enough to arrest you. As soon as you imply anything more than your time and companionship verbally, you can be arrested. But no, they're going to wait and get the sex act. Now, surprisingly, police officers have to volunteer to do police prostitution things, because think about it, you might not appreciate your husband's doing this at work, right? You might have an issue with that. So wouldn't it be nice if they just said, "We think this is sleazy and this is really wrong, and we're just not doing this anymore"? And back in the day, when there were fewer women cops, they were the highest paid positions because not too many female cops wanted to dress like a whore and go out on the street. So they did all that kind of tactics. So I'm going to tell you how I changed things in Hawaii, and this is really cool. I was watching the Colbert Report, and I can't remember the subject, but the last 3 seconds, Jimmy Carter came on and said something stupid about we need to save the sex slave girls of these young girls around the world. And I started typing in the comment section, "Well, what about the women in Hawaii?" And about a week later, all of a show, they do a whole skit on it. I'm thinking, more people are going to see this on late night TV than all the noise I make. And it was brilliant. And they would say it, and they would say it twice. It was an essential crime-fighting tool. Because the prostitutes, cop check, they insist on having sex with no money up front to make sure you're not a police officer. And he would say it again because it's so insane. You're like, what? Yes. And they were fighting for their right because it was in their legislation. They didn't want to remove their right to be able to have sex with prostitutes. So they did change the law because obviously, people don't like this when it's in the law. So the next thing they did, the cops did, is they went into the massage parlors and they arrested all the women and they charged them with sexual assault. Under sexual assault, they would have went to jail for a year. They would have been sex offenders for life. Prostitution was a 30-day offense. Now, luckily, the DA realized that this wasn't going to fly, that no jury was going to be convinced. I walked into a massage parlor to be touched, and now I'm claiming I was assaulted when you touched me. That's not really going to fly. But then it made me start to think, what was with these cops' need to keep arresting them women? They were inside a business. No one seemed to be complaining about them. What was their, why do they have to get these women so bad? It seems there's this deep-seated hate for prostitutes. We don't know who they are. We don't know what they look like. We don't know where they are, where they live, but we have the need to hate them anyway, just because they exist. So, needless to say, we're not going to go to PTA meetings and say, I'll be on the Brownie Committee, and by the way, I'm a hoe. That's not going over well. So we're going to have to take the same steps we did with gay rights. We're going to have to be decriminalized. We're going to have to get hate crime legislation. We need discrimination legislation. And we keep bringing up the 2010 Obama administration said prostitutes would not be excluded from any public services. And that's how we got the rape compensation. We threw that in their face. Hey, Obama said, and you're discriminating against us, and we're not going to be. A lot of this was so easy to do because if you can shame people into going away and not stay, it's really easy to bully people that are being shamed, whether they're addiction or sex work or whatever their issue is that you're shaming them for. So when you rid yourself of that shame and you're able to stand up for yourself, you find out that most of their arguments don't even make sense. So I want to talk to you about, let's talk about health for a minute. Does anyone here think it's in the best of public health and safety to confiscate condoms from street-based workers? Anyone? Anyone think that's a good idea? Well, that's what they do. They feel the need to be able to say, if you have more than 2 condoms, it proves you're a hoe, and you don't have to solicit me, and I can just take you to jail because you're a hoe. We actually have a law called manifestation in some places. You looking like a hoe, you can go to jail. And this happened to Monica Jones in Arizona. Monica Jones is a transgender woman. She was a student, I think she was taking, social justice or social work or something at the Arizona place. Now, they're crazy in Arizona. If you're a sex worker, don't go to Arizona, okay? Do not do it. In Arizona, they have Project Rose, Bethany Church, and Project Rose, the prosecutor has an office at this church, and they round up the women, whether they're street workers or on Backpage, and they bring them in there, and he comes out and says, hi, I'm Mr. Prosecutor, and she goes, do I need a lawyer? I want to talk to a lawyer. He goes, oh, honey, you don't need a lawyer. You're not under arrest. But if you don't enter the 6-month residential Catholic charity-based deferment program, we're going to be issuing a warrant for you for prostitution. Okay. Again, they don't ask if they're a victim, don't ask if they're nothing. So the ACLU got on board, we rallied around. Monica got us a lot of attention. Monica was arrested for walking as trans. Actually, she had been at an event protesting Project Rose, and on her way home from the event, she saw a man in a parking lot she thought was cute. She approached him and said hello, and was arrested. She was convicted. After she was convicted, she was studying in Australia where she had like 3 more weeks worth of field work to get her degree, and she's at the Australia airport, and they wouldn't let her into the country because they found out she was a hoe. So her conviction was overturned, and they ruled that it wasn't on the constitutionality. It was thrown out, overturned, but we were really going after the fact that we wanted to get rid of manifestation laws, which didn't happen. So other tactics they use with like making strippers register and then it becoming public record. Anyone can look up the public record. And this happened to 30 strippers in Seattle. Man filed Public Information Act, and the judge gave him an injunction, and he said to this man, you do know why these women don't want you to know who they are. And he says, Your Honor, I just want to pray for them by name. And the judge says, what happens when you leave the list at Dunkin' Donuts, dude? This just isn't going to happen. And I'm sitting there screaming, why are these women registering anyway? Did they take, like, a class on how to give a safe lap dance? Is there a reason to this? Or is it more ways to discriminate against people? In Texas, there's a $10 poll tax if you walk into a strip club to pay for testing rape kits. Does that not imply strippers cause rape? In Florida, they want to do it, but they want the money to go to the trafficking people. So the adults are supposed to strip and help you raise money for what? None of it makes sense. So where can we go? What do you want to open for some questions? Because I think I've puttered myself out for a while, which is a good thing, believe me. And if we want to, if anyone's shy, we can write down questions too and send them up too. Sometimes that's helpful because, come on, everyone's like, all right, here we go.
I'll start things off. I think you started out, I want to say thank you very much for coming and thank you for this discussion. It's so loaded, and by loaded I mean everything's in there. It's kind of the kitchen sink talk on this issue. And some of the things that really capture my attention, maybe they don't capture everyone else's attention, but are things like NGOs, non-governmental organizations, are what you're referring to, what in the United States we refer to as nonprofits. These organizations that are ostensibly trying to do good, but everyone employed by these organizations, I mean, these are often very much businesses where there's a salary to be made, and who's against doing good in the world, right? And we see the commercials on TV for nonprofit organizations, and if you don't give, you hate puppies. And it's kind of the I hate puppies approach. And what I'm hearing kind of, not just between the lines, but kind of in the public milieu and the collective conscience, the mentality toward sex workers, is this double use of the word trafficking. Because when you hear the word trafficking, I think people hear transport. I think they imagine boxcars on trains filled with non-English speaking 14-year-old girls. And who would be for that? You must hate puppies if you are advocating for that. And there's this complete misunderstanding because no one's advocating for shipping people by boxcars. And if you look the word trafficking up in any dictionary, the first definition that's going to pop up is
to move.
The sale of contraband. Well, yeah, but as a result of the drug industry, they're using it to mean the sale of contraband, something that's not supposed to be bought and sold. I'm not supposed to grab some oregano at home and sell it to you and tell you that it's weed. And if I do, I've engaged in drug trafficking because I bought or sold contraband. And they're using the word two ways. They're using it to basically be a substitute for prostitution, if I hear you correctly. And on the other hand, they're using it to represent all of the dark forces of evil and puppy haters.
And you know what else they're doing it to? It's getting bigger. Now migrating is trafficking. We're looking at everyone over that's fleeing, all the refugees.
Right.
They wanted to label them traffickers and smugglers a couple months ago. And the UK, they leaked, the WikiLeaks leaked the document. The UK wanted to blow the boats out of the water with the people on it and just say, oh, well, they were traffickers. Now, even if someone had money to pay me to get on my boat, does it matter if I got paid? But you're right. They just overplayed that so much that they totally separated.
I don't want to be a puppy hater.
Right. Well, another one that what they're doing with Amnesty International, if you support decriminalization of third parties, that you're promoting pimping and pandering, and you're okay with the traffickers selling 13-year-old girls. If you stand up for sex worker rights, you're standing up for traffickers. Go ahead. I'll let you go first.
What's your opinion on social workers?
As far as how social workers can help sex workers?
Yeah.
Okay. I believe when you're working with any kind of a victim, whether you're raped, mugged, sex worker, or anything, the first thing you say to a victim is, what is it you want? How can I help you? For instance, if you're raped, you might not want to report it. You might not want to go to the hospital, or you might want to go to the hospital, but you don't want to file a police report because you don't want to go through the courts. You're domestic violence. You might not want to report. You might not want your husband in jail because then he's not going to be able to pay you child support. So if I remove your agency and I force you to prosecute your rapist or your husband, this isn't about you anymore. So I would say in any situation, you need to find out what people's needs are by asking them what their needs are. And part of me can already feel sorry for you because you're not going to have many resources to try to help people with. But sometimes the willingness and presenting it like I just did and asking you what you need and want will make the world a difference even if you don't have any materialistic services for them. Sometimes that can really help someone heal alone, that you're able to listen and not judge them and it be about them.
You've talked about these nonprofits and NGOs. Have they ever raised any concerns about the Catholic Church in regards to the pedophile scandal? And also, did they raise any questions about Pope Francis when he visited the U.S. Last month because of the connections he had with human trafficking issues during the dirty wars and the stealing of children?
Not a peep. And I wanted to point out you can go to guidestar.org and look up almost any NGO. And when I looked up Equality Now, one of those women made $270,000 in just 10 months. It was one of the people that was stalking my Ellen, my friend up in New York. And most of these people are making $100,000 a year. But there is a way to fix it. I've got a plan to fix it. Now, remember when Obama said 85 cents on each healthcare dollar is going to go to patient care, and for now on, the administrators and the insurance companies only get 15% profits? That sounds fair, right? Well, it needs to be the same with the NGOs. I read an article a couple months ago. It listed the 10 worst charities, veterans places, people raising money for kids, all these different organizations. It wasn't just sex work. 10 cents on the dollar go to the veterans or the people. And, you know, I understand someone needs to run the show, but that's why the NGO and the sex trafficking movement. But think about this, too. It was Bush's brilliant idea we're going to let public NGOs create provide public services. And we're going to do away with public services with the government. Well, tell me that they weren't worried about there wouldn't be enough NGOs to hand out food or hand out this or hand out. Of course they knew that was going to happen. And then they like to tell you their entitlement programs. Let me tell you what, you pay taxes, you paid for those services. And I think we have a right to start demanding where we want our tax dollars to be spent. But I think if we put that into a law that 85 cents on any NGO dollar has to go direct service for whatever population they claim to want to help. Because when you look up their tax returns, you can see their board members and their salaries, and you can see their expenses. See, when they get to go to all these trafficking conventions, they fly first class and stay in 5-star hotels, and these conferences are expensive. Meanwhile, I turn tricks and I pay for my own shit to go do these things, and I don't get a salary or nothing. But so there is a way to fix it.
Well, it goes along with how celebrities get on the bandwagon for all of the anti-trafficking stuff. So you get all these people who they're actors. They have no dog in the fight. They don't know anything about social justice. They're not educated on the issues. Yet they're the ones that are going before the United Nations testifying about how awful trafficking is. It's creating this kind of cult of celebrity about this kind of stuff. And I think it makes me think about Somali Mom. Mm-hmm. This is a woman who made an industry of herself about her own supposed victimization, and she creates this shill organization, and she's now been knocked down several pegs because a bunch of activists from what you call Whore Nation just exposed that, she was doing this to make a payday for herself. So that's what's really frustrating for someone who works with people who are committed to social change around this stuff. You get all these friggin' celebrities, and they're like, oh, it's such a terrible problem. They know they're using their voice to make the celebrity, and that's this organization, the website you talk about, the Star, what is it?
GuideStar.org.
Yeah, and you find out how little money is actually going to any of the organizations that we're giving our money to help create social change, and there's no services.
Right. And actually, my mentor pointed that out because when she wrote her letter to Amnesty, first of all, she called them out because at one point they supported some bad film that stigmatized us, created a lot of bad laws, and she came up to this one little. She says, I'm particularly concerned about how Hollywood celebrities acts as if they have any say over our rights to negotiate for our labor, defining our safe work conditions, and with whom. This elite class lobbies for unfair labor practice that continue to criminalize their occupation. While their labor is protected not only by state and federal laws, they have benefit working under collective bargaining, unionized contracts with elected representatives. In addition, they have layers of manager and agents who lobby for their wages and work conditions. It's hypothetical to demote us to a low-class status while they run a boycott on who gets to purchase our labor and how. And to go back to Cambodia, the Somali lady, it was really even worse what she did. So the U.S. sent $600 million, because over there most of the whores hang out in bars. But I can't go into a bar and just assume every woman in there is a whore. Maybe 98%, but they would round them up and take them to the police, and they would say, you were going to be kept at the police indefinitely unless you go to rehab. The rehab is this lady's prison sewing school. They lock you up, there's fences, like prison, and they don't pay you to learn to sew. So whether it takes you 3 weeks or 3 months to learn to sew, once you learn to sew, you're sent to the factories to work for $80 a month, and your rent's $40 a month. And we're like, what? So they're forcing them to work at slave-wage jobs. That is actually the real definition of human trafficking. You do not have someone's consent, you're forcing them to work in an occupation. When I was in labor school, I said to some of these women, we were talking about the women that are working in the Nike factories for 27 cents an hour, and I said to them, what do you think they'd do for $100 an hour, $200 an hour? No one would shame them for it, right? They go, no. Oh, but we come to the U.S., we're going to shame you for $200 an hour, because you should just go to work for $8 to $10 at Walmart, even though it won't pay your rent. I mean, no one can live on minimum wage. Everyone's living in their parents' basements and student loan debt. I don't know how everyone's making it. And everyone wants to pretend poverty's not a problem. The police aren't a problem. Nothing's a problem. But more.
I have a question. In terms of making it non-criminal, if it becomes a business, how do you prevent greed and corruption that's so common with everyday businesses of unfair wages, or then denying people, say someone gets hurt on the job somehow, everyday things that happen in ordinary jobs.
Mm-hmm.
how do you prevent that stuff from coming into?
I think we can prevent part of it. I don't think in any industry you can always prevent all labor abuses, because there's many legalized businesses and industries. Agriculture, it's regulated. It still happens. We just had a recent case in Rhode Island where the workers were owed a month's worth of wages. The court told them they had to pay these, like, 4 or 5 workers $30,000. They hadn't paid. They protested in front of the guy's house. They rung the doorbell. The guy opened it up and hit the lady with the bat like 5 times and even hit the cop. Then they arrested him. I'm thinking, why isn't he in jail when he stole their wages? That's wage theft. Now let's think about this. If you're an illegal immigrant, it's pretty easy for me to threaten you, whether you work at Walmart or Bravo, because all I got to do, I don't even need to take your passport. All I got to do is say, bitch, I'm going to tell. And you're going to do anything I say. So first of all, when people are criminalized, it's the same thing as being an illegal immigrant. You can't tell anyone. So decriminalization will mean all sex workers, and the majority of us are women, can pick up the phone and dial 911 and say, I need help. And it actually, you guys remember the Craigslist killer in 2008? He killed a girl in Boston. He went to Rhode Island, and because we were decriminalized, when he robbed her, she picked up the phone and dialed 911. And then they lied to the media. They told the media Craigslist wouldn't cooperate. Craigslist gave the guy's IP address. It's the government that won't cooperate with us. So there needs to, we've talked a lot about me and my mentor, because we know we've just recently seen Rent Boys in New York go down. It was the biggest male gay escort site in the world. We don't want to see men in charge of brothels where the majority of the workers are women. We think that's a bad idea. Okay, we're not saying that they can't, manage themselves. Now, in New Zealand, 2 or 3 workers can work together. They pay a $200 licensing fee that it doesn't go out on a public list, and us 2 or 3 women can share an apartment or a workspace. But if it's more than 3 workers, then you have to get the big brothel license. You pay more, and then they do the background check to make sure you don't have any kind of labor abuse or anything in your background that would be dangerous to put you in charge of the workers. And like I said, the one worker sued the brothel manager for sexual harassment. Think about it, sexual harassment in a sex brothel, and you win? That's pretty powerful. So it will still happen, but we can minimize, I would say, the majority of it with good policy. That's a great question. Come on, don't be shy. You got too quiet? Let me think of something else. Okay. Oh, Backpage versus Dart. So we've heard all this, once Craigslist went away, the war became on Backpage. And actually, Craigslist volunteered to close their site because Craigslist was a community board. And they were just tired of being harassed. And so when the government says, you should take credit cards if you're not going to prove they're 18, they did that. They did phone verifications. They actually tried to give one of the trafficking people like a $5,000 check. And I remember seeing they had the big check on the news, and they whipped up the check. We're not going to take their blood money from the traffickers. And if people are starving, we don't care where the money comes from, right? But no. So anyway, Backpage we knew was going to be different because Backpage is business. And there's been 2 or 3, I think it was Jersey, where else was it? Washington, and another state. There's 3 states that try to sue Backpage and shut it down. They're all hosts. And the judge says, there are legal adult jobs in the adult industry, porn, cam, phone sex, and, you can't say they're all criminals, so it's up to the police to figure out who's the criminal. And I want you to think about, anyone ever see a Yellow Page ad for an escort in the Yellow Pages? They've been around for 40, 50 years. No one ever bothered them. No one ever called that trafficking. Those ads used to cost $10,000 a year. When you worked for those agencies, you had to give them half your money because they had a lot of overhead, But they screened your calls and did a lot. Nowadays, people post a line and want to take half your money, and that's what they call an agency now. So anyway, because of all this data Norma's been pulling and Tara's been pulling about when the cops said, we arrested this many people and we pull the records and we find out it doesn't make sense, Elizabeth Knoll from Reason.com has been doing a lot of press. And they just signed off as one of the plaintiffs on the Backpage versus Dart case. So Dart's out of Chicago. He's the sheriff there. And he wrote a letter to Visa MasterCard and asked them to please stop processing credit cards for Backpage. Last year, DOJ put the squeeze on banks, and they closed all the accounts of legal porn performers. They even closed the account of a lady whose husband was the porn performer. They're doing it to hookah bars. Now, I don't like payday loans. They're doing it to them. Anyone they don't like, they're shutting down their businesses. This is illegal. But you remember what happened to the banks? When the banks were the bad guys, they said, you know what? We know they're bad, but we need banks, so it's okay they're criminals. We'll give them a fine. Well, but they're going to shut us down even though we didn't do anything illegal. Could you imagine if they did that to stores, like tire stores, to promote one brand? And it's almost like the mob taking out their competition, so now their business is going to take off. So basically, first Backpage got an injunction, and they said, yes, we are pretty sure you're going to be able to prove reparable damages. So all of a sudden, all the women couldn't advertise. Well, Backpage was great. They said, you know what? We're going to give you all your ads free until we can figure it out, because they thought it was going to shut us down. They've been able to locate trafficking victims and underage workers by ads. Without the ads, people on the street, there's no way to locate them. Now, last year, they did this to my Red Book out in California. Now, on my Red Book, the girls are also we're vetting clients. I'm calling you for a reference. You saw Joe. Was he okay? And you keep in your mind, just because Joe was okay with you doesn't mean he ain't going to do nothing to me. But I find out if you know who someone is and where they work, they're most likely not going to harm you if you know that. So this thing with Backpage is really putting people at risk. It's taking away their safety nets. And when you were talking about when he was talking about the word trafficking, I want to talk about the word harbor, because when we read trafficking laws, we hear the word to harbor a prostitute, to give her and if you look at the word harbor, it means to protect, to shelter. So if you let and think about it, if I actually found a trafficking victim and took them in and let them sleep on my couch, I'm a trafficker. I don't have to take any money. I don't have to post an ad. I don't have to help you. And 3 years ago, I actually went out to rescue a woman, and she didn't even call Coyote. She just called my escort ad because she knew I was an older woman. And she said she was 22. She had just escaped a pimp. She was down at the airport at a hotel, and I went down to get her. And I didn't know how old she was. She didn't have idea. She could have been 15. I don't know. And I said to her, what do you want? Do you need services? Do you want to report this? Do you need to go to a shelter? What is it? Because I can't bring her home, right? And she goes, no, I want to keep escorting. I'm just tired of them taking all my money. And I don't have any ID, and I want you to get me a hotel room. And I was like, oh, hell no, I'm not going to jail for trafficking. I ain't doing that. So I drove her to Connecticut to her mother's house and gave her $50 because they didn't know what else to do. And meanwhile, I'm calling Norma, and Norma's going, do not call the police. They'll take her to jail. And it's really sad when you can't trust the police to protect you. But we're looking at a lot of these things now. We're seeing cops raping women in traffic stops. Domestic violence cases, you've been raped, you call the cops and they assault you, and then they claim it was consensual and they're only charged with misconduct. And I don't know why you thought it was consensual, because I was crying with a black eye when you got here. Now, let's turn that situation around. They want you to believe that there's 300,000 youths that see 40 clients a day. They say, they see 20, 30, 40 clients a day. And we did the math. There'd be no way. They'd have to be lined up in the hallway. It'd be 3 minutes at a time. There's just no way, okay? Then Norma went to the census and she figured out the amount of men between 17 and 70 in the United States would have the money to hire an escort. There's not enough men to give those 300 children. Where would you get the clients? But then you started to think, too, I'm not saying there's not some creepy people in the world that would have sex with someone that was crying with a black eye. Yeah, there's some scuzbags. But I think the majority of clients are not going to go for that. They're definitely not going to come back. They want someone that's going to participate in the act, okay, because you could have a blow-up doll or you could be in a morgue instead. So that's not really going to, but they want you to believe that. They want you to believe that, this is violent and da-da-da. But then if you're raped or abused as a child in the church, no one seems to care about that unless you were paid. And believe me, I don't think it's okay that teenagers are doing sex work. I think when we find a 17-year-old and we rescue them, we need to hand that kid a 2-year housing voucher, a monthly check, and a free education with no questions asked. And if the kid screws it up, they screw it up. But that's on them. But you can't say you've got to do this, you've got to be home at 10, you've got to be overtaking everything away. So some of these are stings of the nationwide ones. It was a year or two ago, they rescued 165 kids. Sent 8,500 cops to 101 cities to find 165 teenagers. I'm pretty sure I could find 1 or 2 teenagers in every city I go to by myself. And they said most had run away and not been reported missing by Department of Family Services. Why isn't that a felony? And who's collecting the check for that kid, whether they're in a foster home or DS? Someone's getting the check for that kid. Every month that kid's awarded the state. And no one's investigating that. I know one time in Florida they were missing 200 or 300 kids. They just lost them in the sister care, and they didn't even know where they were anymore. I've read stories where they took a baby away from a woman because she was on crack and gave it to another woman who was collecting a check for 2 years before the baby was dead. And they're physically supposed to, I think every 90 days, they're physically supposed to come to your house and see the child. And this had went on for 2 years. But no one ever goes to jail or, it's really sad because we're failing our youth. The United States has 2.5 million homeless kids today. Could you imagine what it would be like if you're living in the car with your mom? Would it be easy for you to concentrate in school? Last year, Congress cut the school lunch budget for kids. Talk about shameful. Wouldn't it have been nice if Congress had said, you know what, American kids are important. We're all going to give up a half a day vacation day and we're going to feed Americans' kids. Oh, no, we can't do that. I think we would do it. We're poor, or we would do it. But the rich people won't give anything. So when you hear things like entitlement, these are your tax dollars. When you pay, and people would like to tell you we don't pay taxes. And I'll tell you what, I pay more in rent than most people making minimum wage make all year. I pay property taxes. When I pay rent, I'm paying for police departments, fire departments, schools, and everything in my neighborhood. Every time I spend $1, I spend 7 cents. Now, a lot of us used to pay taxes. I'm going to tell you why some of us stopped paying employment taxes. If you pay taxes, they charge you with money laundering. If you don't pay taxes, they charge you with tax evasion. I like less. I only make enough money to pay my bills because I want to be a starving activist and not worry about retiring, which is probably silly. And at any time, if I had a bunch of money saved, whether I pay taxes or not, they can come and say, you're a hoe, and they can take everything away. 3 years ago in Connecticut, they found a 52-year-old woman. Someone had called the cops, and she opened the door and said, I'm an escort. They went away, and they came back with a warrant a few days later. They found $30,000 in a bank account with $500,000, and they legally seized that woman's life savings. A couple of years ago, they found a stripper going through Jersey with $1 million in cash, and they confiscated her money. And they had to give it back because she was on her way to buy a business. She had saved up this money stripping for 15 years, and the judge made them give her $1 million back. But many places have laws. If they confiscate your car, your computer, or a bunch of cash, and then they prove you're exonerated. They actually prove you're not guilty, okay? You then have to have a lawyer file to get that computer back and all this stuff. In Arizona, they don't ever have to give it back, even if you have the money, even if you sue. They can actually confiscate your house and throw you out in the street and never give it back, even if you didn't do anything. But amazingly, things like running a house of prostitution or running a crack house, those are misdemeanors. Go figure. They're not under the big trafficking umbrella. Yeah, go ahead.
I've been trying to kind of word this question. Would you say that the over-education or the entire phenomena is getting more and more media of human trafficking, would you agree that has kind of kept sex workers from getting services when it's really needed?
Absolutely. Not only is it, it's really carried the trafficking narrative, because the media is a big part of it. Of course it is. But we found out in Alaska that a lot of the shelters will not take sex workers in. Even the ones that will, some of the staff are okay, some of the staff are mean. I've even heard horror stories in shelters where, there was a guy that had the keys that was in charge of the shelter at night, and he was shaking down the women for sex for who he wanted to use the washer machine first. Because, if you get desperate people, I'm pretty sure I could convince anyone in this room to turn a trick for a blanket and burger if you were cold and hungry enough. Would anyone blame you? If you were really cold and hungry? No, people are like, no, they're trying to survive. So, yes, I do think it also, to put that condition that you need to exit in order to get this, that, or, could you imagine, you have to exit to get Obamacare. You've got to be a victim to get and then when you're labeled a victim, there's nothing that comes with I'm thinking if the state wants to label me as a victim, they better come up with something. Or remember we used to pay the farmers not to farm? Maybe they need to pay the hoes not to hoe, or... I know that's not going to fly, but it's worth putting it out there.
So when you were talking about nonprofits and NGOs, I think that's what you said. If you were, not you specifically, but sex workers, as a whole, if they were given the means of support and services, I know that there will never be, like, not sex workers, because people need to make money, people need to be able to survive. But do you think with the right resources, people could leave the sex work trade?
I think we could.
Would want to.
I think a lot of women would. Give you an example. If I had a good job with an NGO, I'm kind of tired of this. Not that I think it was a bad life. It gave me stability all these years, but yes, I would. So women do want more options.
I have another question, sorry.
That's okay.
And, why would it be beneficial for a sex worker to work in a brothel rather than just manage herself?
Okay, that's a good question. If you work at a brothel, say I want to work Monday, Wednesday, Tuesday, and Thursday because I'm going to school 3 days a week, and I'm married with 2 kids. A lot of strippers actually drive an hour away to strip in a different city. This helps them keep it separate. They don't need an in-call. They don't need to screen their clients. There's someone there if they scream out or hit a panic button. They like that. They don't mind giving away 40, 50% of their income to put those things in place. There's also, whether you want to be high volume or low volume, if you're going to be high volume, you have to have expensive ads, you have to pay for hotels, you have to travel. If you're low volume, you can see a few clients a week, and you don't need an in-call if you do it in a residence that you're living in the same space. Now, if I have 2 small children, even if they're at school, I'm not going to have men come to my house during the day. No, I have kids that are there at night. Just not doing it. As a single lady, 50-year-old woman that lives alone with a cat, that's okay for me. But in other situations, no. And it's also the stigma. I want to talk about a couple school teachers. There was 2 teachers fired in New England a few years ago. One of them had done porn 16 years ago, and her chemistry student recognized her. Another one had blogged about escorting during college. Neither one had ever been arrested. They lost their jobs over that. And we're like, what? So you're right. If we have the resources, we can lower poverty. We can lower, they're trying to tell people they're being lured into the industry. No, they're running towards it. There was nothing else. But you're right. We're never going to eradicate it because there's always going to be that lady that wants that Gucci purse, even if her rent's paid. She just wants those expensive things. So it's a difference between meeting people's needs, but we can definitely lower the collateral damage, the impact, and make it safer and a smaller industry for everyone involved. Sure. These are great questions.
I would add to that I think a big misperception that people have is that sex workers do sex work 40 hours a week, 50 hours a week, 7 days a week, and many of the sex workers I worked with in Nova Scotia, they had other jobs on the side, and they augmented their income by having a regular date that they would see twice a month on their payday or whatever. So this idea that people are 24/7 on call, ready to work, is really it's a misconception. A lot of people will work just if their benefits run out, they'll see a couple of clients just until they get their next benefit check or until their next payday from their other job. So there's a lot of it that goes into thinking about what the dynamics are around it. And you were talking before about people who work as strippers, people who work as call girls, people who work as cam girls, and there's a whole variety of things that constitute sex work. So it's not just being a streetwalker, walking the streets, turning tricks.
You're going to be really jealous of how many hours a week I have to work. 3 to 5. But on the other hand, I give up 40 to 50 hours a week to do activism, and I do that for free. But yeah, 3 to 5 hours must be nice, huh?
So 2 things. I was wondering if you could speak more to the issue of police entrapment, police extorting from sex workers either money or actual sexual services, and if that qualifies as a form of rape, and also give a little broader explanation of the labor union activism that you're involved in, and also maybe some critiques of ESPLU, how it's come into contradictions with the IWW,
and things like that. Okay, so the first thing was about the police and what they're allowed to do. So like we said, police are allowed to have sex and sexual contact with people and then arrest them. But let's talk about consent for a moment, because we understand when you say yes, that at any time during sex you're allowed to change your mind and say no. We understand that, right? where I'd just say, you're not allowed, just because they said yes doesn't mean you get to do what you want, doesn't mean you get to be rough, doesn't mean you get to take the condom off. I can stop it at any time. That's what consent means. So when a person lies and says they're a client and they're going to pay you $200 an hour, and then they have sex with you and arrest you, does that not become rape? Because you didn't consent under those conditions. Now, actually, it was a couple months ago, there was a woman raped, and they got the guy convicted, and the editor of Chicago Times came out. Oh, they got after her. Well, I'm glad it wasn't, an ordinary woman that was raped. And she's like, well, that takes away from real rape victims. And this was a woman that was raped and, left for dead in an alley, but because she was a hooker, it was okay. And everyone got really angry at this editor, how did they even publish this crap? Right. So did that answer that kind of? And then you want to do the IWW.
And the ESPLU.
Okay. So I was talking to Andrew on the way up. My mentor, Maxine, had worked with the IWW in California. They helped her get 200,000 signatures to get Prop K on the ballots in 2007. Prop K would have legalized prostitution straight across the board. They got about 42 or 43% of the vote the first try. She didn't have enough money to politically get it done. But she said she bumped heads with the IWW people because they were stuck on third parties being pimps and traffickers. And this is so much ingrained in the media and in your head that, if I hire a driver, basically you give a hooker a ride to 7-Eleven, you're a trafficker. 2 girls in a condom in a hotel room, everyone's a trafficker. I mean, I give my adult daughter money and she's living off the proceeds of a prostitute, which is a felony. So any relationship I have in my life, and it's almost like, anyone ever know a runaway teenager? No one wants nothing to do. Oh, get her out of here, right? She's 15, and oh no, because we know it's dangerous. It will all put us at risk because even though we've not done anything, just being in her presence, we can be in trouble. And this is what it's done to us. And that's why I'm like, how can they say that they want to help us and try to say this is an act of violence towards these women in our community? So, did that answer the IWW?
Yeah. Just what virtues do you think would come out of a sex worker union?
Different aspects. As far as strippers, they will be able to. We want to actually see legislation that says that they are employees, or they can negotiate contracts with the club, or each club would have to do a small union. But then it gets real tricky with the right to work states and the way they're creating all these laws to get rid of the unions, and I really don't know a lot. You know what? I'd like you to interview Maxine with that question sometime, because I'm like a baby with the union stuff. But organizing's got to be the start to get people's rights, to find out what their needs and their work conditions are like, because everyone's conditions might be different. And what your work conditions, if we have 2 mechanic shops, what you guys do and it might be different, but we might be able to get together and talk and say, this would be a good safety tool. And I never thought. And I'll give you an example. I was in Virginia one time, and one of the girls said, I live near a base, and I make the guys text me a copy of their military ID. And I thought, what a brilliant idea. How have I been doing this for 20-some-odd years and never thought of that? So there's always new things that we can learn in any industry to tweak our safety or things like that. But I did want to bring up one more thing. I want to bring up safety real quick. And remember when we got kids and we were told that you don't tell people who you are on the internet when you're 14 because he's a 6-year-old predator, and you can't tell him what school you go to, what your name is, your city, and all that. We tell people that. It's dangerous. And nowadays, women are willing to get in their cars and go meet Joe at Applebee's and not know his last name, not know anything about him. And they don't even tell a friend where they're going. And they think they're safe because they're in public. They're not safe. He can follow you home. He can chloroform you and stuff you in the car in the back of the parking lot. He might, and I'm going to tell you, people that are dangerous look real normal. They don't look shady. They don't look sketchy. They don't look homeless, and they smell good. Okay, and you will not know you're in danger until it's too late. And I like to think I've got a pretty good sense of character and judgment. I've got years of experience, life experience, but I can be fooled. I've been lucky up to now. My luck can change every day. Don't ever, and I'm not suggesting anyone do sex work. Let me be clear about that. Don't ever go meet someone without doing a been verified check. Tell someone where you're going. Make sure people, you didn't hear the stories, from some school, you go have a drink, boom, the girls were raped, and all this. It's not safe out there just because, and people are doing it like it's nothing. And now, we're not even warning kids on the computer anymore. 13-year-olds, they're allowed to tell anyone who they are. But it was only 10 years ago we told our kids not to do this. I want to scream at the government. the government is not a babysitter. If you give your kid an electronic device, that's on you. It's not up to me to monitor what your kid does. But we're even seeing kids being charged with trafficking. We're seeing kids being charged with sexing themselves, and they're being labeled as sex offenders because they're sending sexy pictures to each other. These laws weren't created for that. But we see the kids, lots of cops seem to like child porn. There was one that was just arrested that he had a fetish for 5-year-olds. I shouldn't even laugh. It's not even the most bit funny, but it's just that horrific. And a lot of these guys, they know that they're doing it, and they don't stop them. So.
Any last questions?
They're probably scared because my answers are so low. I think we did great. I appreciate y'all listening to me and inviting me up. It was great. And I've got...
That's all we got for the time for today, folks. Thanks for listening, and tune in next time for another episode of Political Gingervitis. I'm your host, Andrew Stewart, and I want to remind you again, America's greatest social democratic period corresponded with the lives of those wonderful commies, Larry, Curly, and Moe.